All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my live stream events. If you are new to this, I am Rana el Kaliouby. I'm co-founder and CEO of Affectiva and author of the book Girl Decoded, which was published by Penguin Random House this past April. So I started doing this when the book launched and have continued to do so. So every Wednesday at noon Eastern, I'm live streaming conversations with other innovators and entrepreneurs to discuss themes that I touched upon in Girl Decoded. Everything from emotion AI and its applications, tech innovation, AI ethics, leadership, women in technology, diversity, and of course, the importance of global perspectives in technology and business today. One of my favorite parts of these live streams, honestly, is hearing from you, everybody who's tuned in, and seeing all the different places you are tuning in from around the world. So please let us know where you're tuning in from, share your thoughts, share your questions, and we will answer as many of them as we can. A few housekeeping items. We are still giving away 2 free copies of Girl Decoded on these live streams to people who are tuning in. Yeah, so if you want to be entered to win, definitely engage with us with a question or a thought, and we will reveal the winners at the end of today's live stream. And if you don't want to miss any of our future live streams, be sure to follow me either on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter so that you get notified when I go live. For today's conversation, I'm super excited to cover a topic that is very timely, and there's a lot of disruption happening in this space. It's the future of transportation, and specifically our in-vehicle experiences today and in the future. The automotive industry is undergoing a lot of disruption. There's a lot of exciting developments going on and a lot of automation that is really driving change in this space. The focus is usually what's going on outside of the vehicle. And at Affectiva, we're very kind of passionate about turning it inward and really kind of trying to understand, well, what is happening inside the vehicle? What's happening with the driver? What's happening with the other occupants in the car? And how can we use that information to really reimagine what the future of our driving and riding experiences look like? So for today, I'm super excited to welcome my guest, Sean Batir. He is a senior machine learning engineer at BMW and has been in this industry for a while, is very passionate about the future of transportation and kind of comes to it from a number of angles. He's been a huge champion of the work we do at Affectiva and a big believer, and I'm very excited to have you with us today, Sean. Thank you.
Thanks, Rana. Yeah, I mean, it's because you guys have an awesome product. So,
so I thought I'd actually start by reading a little excerpt from the book, just to set the stage. And then, Sean, I'll turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at BMW. So I'll read this real quick. I figured, this is pre-COVID, right? So I figured that I spend about 33 days a year driving my kids around to their extracurricular activities. That's a lot of time driving a car. And it doesn't include the amount of time I spend commuting to work every day. I still want to spend the time with my kids, but I would much rather be fully engaged with them while we're traveling than focused on my driving. If I didn't have to be driving, I would be catching up with them, watching the news, reviewing homework, putting the time I would be spending behind the wheel to better use. But I would have to be very confident in the technology before I felt comfortable doing this. I'll admit I'm not there yet, but I think we'll eventually get there to autonomous vehicles. The average American spends close to an hour every day in a car commuting back and forth to work. Imagine what your commute would look like if you didn't have to drive and instead you got into your car in the morning and it didn't look like anything like the interior of cars today. With an AI in charge, it wouldn't need to even have a steering wheel or traditional passenger seats. Instead, the interior would be designed for multiple purposes. This morning, you'd select the office mode. You take out your laptop, sit in a desk chair with a seatbelt, spend a half hour or so prepping for the day, doing work or making calls. At night, you'd select the spa mode. The desk would turn into a sit table, the office chair into a lounge mode. You'd sink into the chair, put your feet up. Sensing that you're tired, the AI system would lower the lights and release a calming lavender scent into the air. You close your eyes, listen to relaxing music, and doze for half an hour. Or maybe you would read an engrossing novel, a memoir. You'd have your virtual assistant arrange to have sushi waiting at your doorstep for when you get home. And when you pull into your house, you'd feel refreshed, ready to spend time with your family. Isn't that better than sitting in traffic?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I love this vision that you paint in the pic and in your book. And I think this is a vision that quite a lot of people want to see, right? You're totally right. I think we spend over pretty much an hour a day in commute.
Yeah. So tell us about a little bit about your background, how you got into automotive, and what do you do at BMW?
Yeah. So hello, everyone. My name is Sean Batir. I worked with Rana about 2 years ago when we did a project with Affectiva, and we were looking at sort of the emotional in-cabin experience, particularly when people are driving. How do we actually figure out if they're falling asleep or if they're fully attentive? And we talk about this a lot, or Rana talks about this a lot in the book. But to just finish out your question, my background is I actually also went to MIT. I don't know if you can see some of this back here. Anyway, yeah. So I was at MIT in 2014, and I studied neuroscience. And then I was in the UK, also like you, Rana, both at Imperial and at Oxford, not Cambridge. But we were focusing on the rivalry. Yeah, I was. I
actually didn't know that you were. I knew that you were at MIT, but I didn't know the Oxford part. That's very cool.
Oh yeah. It was like bio-entrepreneurship, like bioengineering. So I was actually interested more in this like human-machine interface at the time. So sort of like the theme of my life has always been like, how do we connect humans with machines, or how do we basically augment humanity to go beyond our like physical and our cognitive limitations? So that's like kind of why I love like what was happening when I heard about you at Affectiva, because basically, right, we are thinking of using emotion AI and computer vision to make us better as humans. Like we're not trying to replace it, but just augment it, sort of like superpowers that we see with like modern day superheroes in Marvel and DC world. So absolutely.
I love that angle of augmentation, because that's definitely the lens we see it as well. So how did you end up being in the automotive industry?
You know, it was actually a very chance twist of fate. So I was actually in the middle of a PhD program, and I just went to a conference, and at the time I was just wondering, oh, how could I maybe apply some of this computer vision? And then I just got reached out to by a recruiter. So it was very interesting. To get a little bit mystical on you on this call, I think a lot of it has to do with like getting clear with intention. The truth is I basically got really clear on where I wanted to go. I was like, okay, so I want to be applying AI in a manner that allows me to augment humanity. And I didn't like have the details specifically of like auto industry, but I did have like the general domain. And I got like clear about like the style of work, right? I was like, oh, I want to be working in this innovation lab where I am, you know, working on experiments, collaborating with companies like Affectiva. That was actually on the like manifestation meditation list.
I love that.
Yeah, and then literally 2 weeks later, this whole interview process just began. So
are you familiar with the law of attraction?
100%. Yes. I think that The Secret is like one of the big books that like really popularized the law of attraction. And I have another book next to yours, which I'm also working on right now. It's called The Buddha and the Badass.
Oh, I haven't read that. Do you recommend that? I'm taking
I definitely do. I think it ties some to what you had written in your book, which was like you mentioned that your personal life and your work actually flowed into each other. And that definitely also is something that the Buddha and the Badass like cover. So it's this idea that like we can both be spiritual masters, like knowing who we are, knowing where we want to go and how we want to contribute to the world, but then also have that sort of badass element being like a change maker and sort of like pushing the boundary of a field where maybe things may still be conservative, but you can bring and infuse your own unique vision into that space.
I talk about that a lot in the book too, this idea of an entrepreneur or a founder having faith, because you're often painting a vision of the world that hasn't yet existed, and you need to bring people on board, and that takes a leap of faith. So you have to have that kind of, you have to, I guess, coexist with uncertainty and embrace building this vision of the future. So question, so how do you think about human-machine interfaces in the context of a car, and where do you see the future going?
Yeah, so, there's been a lot of active debate within BMW and also just within the automotive industry of like how each company wants to frame the individual in context of the car. Mm-hmm. So in general, right, humans, we convey a rich canvas of emotions through our face. And that was one possible approach to look at how you can augment your own abilities of getting from point A to point B with enriched data from the facial canvas. So for example, let's say that I'm trying to, get from my home in Palo Alto to my office, mm-hmm. which might be in San Francisco. If I was doing that and I started falling asleep because it's 5:30 in the morning, mm-hmm. then the canvas in my face might have, monikers that could be detected by some variation of like an LSTM and RPM, like region proposal network. So basically my face will start like becoming kind of droopy, and then over 5 seconds, it freaks out and then begins to sort of enter a collaborative model. And the vision would be that the car could, maybe intervene and say, hey, Sean, you're falling asleep. I'm going to be more vigilant. Right. And then maybe like you could increase some of that autopilot capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting, because the Affectivity would talk about the autonomous vehicle continuum. So the L1, L2 is kind of where, the cars we have today, right? You've got, driver is pretty much in control with a little bit of assistance, maybe, all the way to like L3. Well, you've got the semi-autonomous and this kind of transfer of control between driver and car. And then of course, L5 takes us to the fully autonomous world. What is the role of AI throughout this, and emotion AI in particular, throughout this continuum? So we talked about driver monitoring, which is here and now, I would say. Can you kind of take us into the future a little bit?
Yeah. So now this is just purely like my own speculation / understanding where the literature is. The vision of having vehicles that can just take you from point A to point B with zero human intervention. Mm-hmm. Technically, I don't think that's impossible, because what's limiting is actually our like city and our municipal infrastructures, as well as potentially governmental support, depending on the country you're in. Because you need to have like real-time update of the highway. You need to be able to gather all that information of like the context of all other drivers who are in the, say, scene. And this allows us to have close to full information of the vehicle's context. The difficulty is that requires integration of sensors, and that requires like integration with, systems that are just beyond the space within your car. And so that's more of an administrative human issue that is blocking that, rather than purely the technical. We have seen these latent capabilities in like some military and defense applications. So really the money is there, and a good amount of the technology exists as well. It's really coordinating people to make it happen. Now, that said, something that like also just pops up into my mind is, it was actually when I was meeting you for the first time 2.5 years ago. After I saw you, I met with Brian Reimer mm-hmm. from MIT's Age Lab. And I remember even distinctly, he said something, I don't know if Brian, if you're on this call, shout out to you. But he mentioned something about how actually the more you automate, the more you need to educate where, when, and how. And that also is quite important, because again, this brings the responsibility back to the human.
Right.
Can we make a vehicle that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Say more about that.
Yeah. So it's like, the idea is, yes, our technology can be in a place where if there's full information, we can create a very simple path navigation from point A to point B. But the issue and the responsibility again falls to the human. Because as you said, if I'm in this scene where I'm in my vehicle and I'm just chilling, like, doing work email, and I have no wheel, but then I'm not paying attention, and then let's say the entire communication system in my 50-mile radius shuts off. Well, if my car is like reliant on that, and if I haven't been educated on the risks
Right.
And of these edge cases, then you're, in the worst case scenario, dead. And in the best case scenario, you emerge like just softly injured. So again, there's a huge element of like human responsibility actually. As we move towards L5, one of the risks, and I think why many people are fearful of promoting the L5, L4 vision, is that it requires us to relinquish some of that control, which we as humans like naturally seek, to machines. And also, if you are relinquishing that control temporarily, there's that sense of like unbounded responsibility, particularly that we need to like maintain our own like responsibility of like the fact I am consciously engaging in this L4, L5 vehicle. I know the risks, and I also know how to intervene if I suddenly lose communication, or if my car's AI system suddenly fails, or if the GPU that this is running on fries.
Right.
Like, what do you do? So,
I think this is especially kind of critical in an L3 universe, which is actually like way closer from a timeline perspective than an L4, L5 world, where on a day-to-day basis, there will need to be a seamless transfer of control between human, co-pilot or driver and the car. And you need these two systems, right, to be in sync. And from our data, we've seen that, when you have a semi-autonomous vehicle, humans kind of have a tendency to take a back seat and not be as vigilant, which is interesting. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think so. What you just mentioned to me about humans not being vigilant in semi-autonomous systems, it reminds me of a line in your book, actually. I think you mentioned that the CDC reports that about 94% of all serious auto accidents are due to human error. But even more than that, we then sort of discussed in the book, how there's this handoff step. Right? The act, in fact, is human beings won't completely be out of a driver's seat anytime soon. And part of that, I think you had a really, really salient example, because I do this every day. I'm in California. Is like you're driving, you're at a stoplight, you're in a suburb, and suddenly you see someone walking their dog, and you have that human, like 1-2 second decision of like, we look at them, you either flag them or you go.
Right.
And that element is a very human thing. Like, I don't think we're going to be putting eyes on vehicles in the front seat, right? So
how do you replicate that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. How do you replicate it? And does it make sense for like these like edge cases to, that's an open question, right? The first pass in my mind, just because you asked on this live call, is, maybe you create some form of like integrated sensor notification system. Yeah. So the vehicle is there, and then someone like is also walking. We assume they have a phone and they get a notification. But as soon as I say that out loud, probably myself and people in the audience think that's insanely over-engineered, because instead of building this entire like data fabric, I could just also look at them, which is like the data fabric that we have as humans, that we've been blessed with emotional intelligence and awareness over like 200,000 years of evolution.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I think of it as having like a shared mental model, right? Like like we all have this shared mental model of what it's like to drive or to be in a street or road with other animals and pedestrians, etc. And how do you build that same shared mental model in the vehicle of the future? And what kind of interfaces that seem naturalistic and not annoying and overtaxing or confusing? So I think it's a really like challenging and interesting kind of space to be in.
Yes, actually, Rana, you made me realize in terms of building shared mental models, this ties to a really interesting opportunity that I kind of see. I don't know if you've heard of Unity, but they work on like, virtual and augmented reality. Yep. One concept and idea that would be very cool, in fact, is the idea of building a sort of shared mental model with your vehicles by maybe having these multiple agents, with these agents being cars. And then you can actually like learn how maybe that shared mental model of a space is evolved over time. And what's nice is like in a platform like Unity, in this virtual augmented reality context, you can actually iterate over multiple instances, and you get free space and time because it's in a virtual reality. It's not in our physical world. And so that might be interesting to create a sort of like prototype, right? Like a prototype shared mental model of how do vehicles interact with human agents moving in a scene.
Yeah, it's this whole space of simulation and data synthesis, which is a lot of what Unity's focused on right now in the automotive space, is just so fascinating. And we're actually thinking of dedicating one of these live streams to just this topic of simulation and data synthesis, because I think there's a lot of innovation happening there. It's such a key enabling technology for the machine learning space, because we need to be able to simulate and generate all this data without waiting for it to happen in real time. Some of it is really sparse, right?
Yeah, and I get chills when you say this, Rana, because we were just talking about like shared mental models and sort of vehicles talking to each other. The interesting thing too is like as we're like moving forward in this decade in the 2020s, I'm starting to see that like a lot of these companies that are popping up, Affectiva, Unity, like NVIDIA, like all of you guys actually have this beautiful opportunity to sort of build this like shared mental model and connect what you have together. Because I'm thinking about mastery like a little bit, and I'll tie this. It's the idea that like you are, you know, an innovative leader, and your domain of mastery is sort of like in emotional intelligence and how we bring that to computer science, how we actually implement that and help people do that, right? Using neural networks, using region proposal networks, RNNs, LSTMs. However, we have other people like maybe perhaps Jensen Huang, who is like cream of the crop. Contribution to society was the popularization of an affordable GPU, which would have been laughable 20 years ago. And then also we have Unity and Denny Lang there, focusing on how do we actually virtualize this. Well, all three of these are essential components if we want to link that together and bring it to a vehicle, right? And I see that as like a huge opportunity, because it's not only like machines that are like in the sort of swarm intelligence, but we as humans like also have our own instance of swarm intelligence. We're much more intelligent together. And we have the capacity to sort of like collectively build off of each other's mastery in order to make something greater than ourselves.
I love that lens of it. Like there's a number of core enabling technologies that have brought us to this point in time. And it's only through close collaboration and kind of building on top of each other that we're able to materialize a lot of that. I love that. Okay,
You're so right. Yeah.
We have a lot of people dialed in and kind of tuned in. So Jordan, hi Jordan, from Boston, and we have a few people from Brazil, actually, Oslo, Boxford, Mass. Hi Sam. I'm just kind of scanning, and Pakistan. Where else do we have? Wales. That's awesome. I think. Yeah, thank you, Lavinia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Hello from Wales, Ron. I'm currently reading your book. You're a great inspiration to women and one of my favorite people in the world. Oh, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing your story with us all. Your work is amazing. Thank you. Hisham, hi. I assume, Hisham, you're tuned in from Dubai. Hisham is actually saying that he is creating a chatbot with your tutorial, Sean. What is your tutorial?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sort of on the side, I like to solidify my own understanding. And sometimes I forget, right? So I build these tutorials to also remind myself how to build some of these components. I recently launched it on Medium. It was just a quick, less than 10-minute video to teach people how to build basic chatbots and dialogue flow.
Amazing.
So yeah, I think it's one of those.
One person who was.
Yeah, it's cool. You know, this piggybacks on what you were just saying about like how there's like this like strange synchronicity of timing as well, right? Like a decade ago, Medium didn't exist, so I didn't have that tool. And like if you were born 30 years earlier, we wouldn't have had like the technology probably ready to like popularize a lot of what Affectiva has.
Correct.
Right. And so it's like, and if we didn't have like this time gap and like when we entered the field respectively, I might not have been able to piggyback off of the work that you've done. And so we're all sort of brought into this like collaborative reality, and it's just exciting. It's very like cosmic consciousness.
Yeah. So we have a question from Ahmed Atiyah. How can I learn machine learning and deep learning? I know of Professor Andrew's courses in machine learning and deep learning, but what next? So I want to kind of paraphrase Ahmed's question a little bit. obviously the whole automotive industry is trying to figure out how to morph from just being a hardware platform to being more of a software and services platform. And what
right.
we're seeing from our vantage point is that there's a lot of demand for people like you, Sean, who have expertise in automotive, but are also software and specifically machine learning people. That, you know, in the Venn diagram, if you think of a Venn diagram, there's not a lot of people who sit in the middle, who have auto experience and are machine learning scientists. And I know you are spending a lot of time reskilling software engineers to become machine learning scientists. So tell us about that and what does that entail?
Yes. So to sort of address that question, you know, for everyone on the call, you probably are aware that there's like software engineers and there are machine learning engineers. And typically the distinction between them is that software engineers, they're much more broad. And I've observed that a lot of, you know, you can say you're a software engineer, but your expertise is actually building like great networking interfaces. I've also met full stack software engineers who are like excellent at building the back end and the front end of websites and linking them together. That is the problem solving paradigm, that's translatable. But the domains of which those skills are applied to, like that's kind of specific to building, again, software infrastructure. Now, in sort of machine learning engineering and particularly machine learning science, what's happening is you're basically taking either work that other companies have done or work that exists, you know, in the literature, and you're implementing a prototype of that. And so that's a slightly different skill because that requires at least understanding a paper, understanding the code behind it, and then implementing it as a first pass. There are also flavors of machine learning engineers where you are also building those data pipelines and sort of at your company. Perhaps how you have your own data lake or data warehouse is unique and different. And so you have to figure out how to basically take that data and build a nice machine learning model. And the truth is, and we get into this in the book as well, but the truth is your quality of machine learning model is truly dependent on your data. Without data, you have nothing. And so to just close out that question, the skills are translatable, but there's like sometimes re-education that's involved, which is like learning how to bring some of that ability to understand the literature, how to understand the paper, and some of these more theoretical concepts in machine learning, which is actually just variations of like applied. There are analogies people have made where they've said that a lot of machine learning is just applied statistics or linear algebra on steroids. You can agree or disagree with that, but basically the idea is that the best forms of ML teams appear when you fuse both software engineers and machine learning scientists and together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. And people who have expertise in both, like we have a few people at our company. We have like your typical kind of researcher background, kind of machine learning scientist. And then we have on the other end of the spectrum, like your traditional software engineers. But increasingly at Affectiva, we have talent that sits in the middle, that's a bridge between these two worlds. And I think that's a crucial skill. Like they are in so much demand because there's not a lot of them.
Yes, I help out. So, you know, my other role at Outco, actually, we help people basically transition from software engineer to machine learning engineer. And what's particularly interesting is you can, and this is more maybe for people on this call who are hiring, you can tell what function someone is almost like their latent skill set is based on how they spend their free time. Typically, a software engineer will be working on side projects and be building things. Like they actually enjoy literally building prototypes. One of my colleagues at BMW, like he is just such a wonder child and is always like building like drones or new communication infrastructures. Like he is very solidly a software engineer and very good at it. On the other end, I also have had colleagues I've worked with who just spend their free time reading papers. They truly love it. They love getting like lost in like new variations of KL divergence and how we can potentially, you know, challenge the assumptions that are underlying maybe information geometry. And so it's that's more of a research machine learning scientist.
Yeah.
And then you have like the sort of curious creatures that are in between. And they're all important.
Yeah, totally. So how does Outco help with that transition from a software engineer to a machine learning scientist? What does that look like?
So it's like a 4-week program, 4 or 5 weeks, and we just go really intense in first reviewing supervised and unsupervised classification. We walk people through how to frame problems for regression, classification, and detection. Cool. And then from there, the third week focuses on how you build machine learning pipelines. And then the last week focuses on actually building neural networks from scratch, as well as understanding the main three, which are computer vision, then recurrent neural networks for like natural language understanding. And finally, we explore some reinforcement learning, which is, I think, where like Unity also pops in. Reinforcement learning is lovely for robotics.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds really. All right, so we have kind of a somewhat. I mean, I want to piggyback on this conversation. So Jordan asked, how do you help people, especially historically marginalized communities, in this time of Black Lives Matter? And how do you help enlighten people to feel comfortable? Jordan, I want to comment on this. At Affectiva, we've been having a lot of conversations on how we can be helpful. Inclusion is one of Affectiva's core values, and we really, I mean, I'm very passionate about it for a whole host of reasons. But I also acknowledge that we still have a lot of kind of how we in our little universe can advance technology, and especially bringing on more Black coders on board. We have an annual training and mentoring program at Affectiva, and this year we've gone virtual, and we've been able to bring on 53 trainees and also sign on about 20 graduate mentors to help with the program. So, 70 plus young people in our program. And when we were crafting it, it kind of coincided with Black Lives Matter. And as a team, we really said, you know what, we're committed to making sure that we're going to reach out and make sure that we extend beyond the typical network that we're able to reach, right? And make sure that we are tapping into communities who would never hear about our, marginalized communities that we wouldn't cross their path. And we were able to reach out and just get people, maybe even people who don't have any coding experience. We have a number of the trainees and the mentees who, they have never coded before, but we still wanted to be inclusive and bring them on board. So lots more to do on our end, but we're definitely committed and starting with baby steps in ways where we think in our universe we can, make some progress. How about you? Like, how do you think about this, especially in this reskilling world?
Oh, you're talking to me. I thought,
yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious at BMW, but just in your an Alco and just your general thoughts on how do we make this space of machine learning more inclusive? What do we need?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so the fact is the industry still is predominantly like male. So that's like something that like we need to, actively strive for to change. And this is a little out of the scope of the discussion, but I would like to, encourage all of my female colleagues out there. Like, you have people like Rana as inspiration, and there's definitely a seat at the table that should be there for you and is there. And maybe more broadly speaking, and in terms of the BLM movement that's happening right now, actually specifically at Outco, we are trying to bring opportunity to people who would otherwise not have the infrastructure or support to have access to things like computer science education. And I think we acknowledge that that's something that is a key area of focus. And oh, sorry, I think I might be having lag. Can you guys hear and see me?
You're good now. I think we lost it a little bit. Yeah.
And then what I also wanted to mention is the quality of data that we collect for our models. And I'm not talking about BMW, but just in general, like in computer vision, if we're building machine learning models that focus on emotion recognition And I think you guys do a really excellent job about this. I'm at Affectiva. This is part of the reason why I wanted to work with you when we did a demo a year and a half ago. But for all those tuning in on the call, Affectiva does a really great job of making sure that they sample data across all different types of ethnic groups. Because the fact is, if you train a model to only recognize white faces, if it sees a non-white face, I mean, you can get very like questionable outcomes to potentially like offensive. Like I've had like an ML model like that was training and thought I was a monkey because I'm brown, right? So I'm just like, yeah, right. Which is like, obviously like I'm not offended by that because that's just how the model is operating. Like it classifies me as out group, and it's out group because I'm not part of the training data. Correct. So it really does mean something when people say we want to build inclusive data models. I know that for some people who might feel a little bit like fatigued about the whole BLM movement, like it could be a little eye roll inducing, but the truth is it is a real issue. And it is something that even as machine learning engineers and scientists, like we do have a responsibility to be docents of it. So
I can't underscore this enough. Totally spot on. Because the inclusivity is in the team that's designing and building these models, because we all have our own blind spots, and the more diverse the perspectives, the better the outcome's going to be, and the more inclusive it's going to be. And data is absolutely a huge part of it. I mean, we've seen that in our business where we've kind of taken on the role of educating the industry, right? It's because often it's not done on purpose. It's just an oversight, but it's an oversight with a lot of
It's often not malicious. It's Correct. Just like the convenience. It's like, oh, I'm in San Francisco, so let's just sample the population. When you realize that we like have misrepresentation and the population in SF is skewed a certain way, you'll end up oversampling the mean shifted population.
Exactly, and you have to be really thoughtful and be very mindful and purposeful about making that data inclusive as possible. So you're getting a lot of feedback from everybody saying, Sean, on target about inclusion, great start, great steps, great work on inclusion and diversity. Sean and Rana, such important points on inclusion in machine learning. And Anna, thank you for your comment. Shared mental models cannot.
I was just reading that.
That diversity, which is awesome. Totally agree. Great comment. So I want to bring us back to the world of automotive. So let's imagine that emotion AI is already integrated into our vehicles. And so our cars have this amazing in-cabin sensing AI. It can sense the driver's state. It can sense how many occupants are in the vehicle. What are they doing? What's their activity? Are they eating, drinking, sleeping? Can you talk a little bit about what that unlocks in terms of personalization, and maybe even kind of the convergence of health and well-being with the automotive space?
Yes.
There's two.
Yeah. So we said very early about like, I think 20 minutes ago that the face is a rich canvas for information, but you're totally spot on. I think if we can also get like pose estimation, then we get a lot more information about, how people by default spend their time. In fact, you can tell, and we know about this from human calls, that in maybe 30 seconds, you can tell someone's level of confidence and maybe self-assuredness based on how they sit or stand.
Yep.
Well, if we suddenly have a canvas into people's most private interiors, aka their cars, especially if you're on the West Coast, then we get that data. I'm not referring to BMW. I'm referring just in general to like whoever is building this system. The car gets this data. Yes. Yeah. Assuming that it is there is now a potential to either use this data that we gather with your consent, of course, maybe potentially recommend or help improve your condition in life, right? Like you can kind of tell if someone is going through a depressed window, especially if we have historical data on them. If they normally had like big, broad postures or just like took up a lot of space, but then they suddenly switched over and like maybe anomalously like were a little bit more reticent, perhaps for a few days. If that could be a potential early warning indicator that we could then maybe also connect to clinical data sources. there's a really nice interplay that could exist if we take elements of lifestyle, particularly how we are in a car, and with, of course, again, consent, we can use it not only to just improve product recommendations, but actually maybe alert, let's say, your GP. That also requires massive infrastructure upgrade, though, and that's more, again, on the part of on some form of governmental program potentially, or perhaps startup could appear and establishes that bridge.
Yeah.
Ideas for Rana's trainees out there.
Yeah, exactly. We actually got a make-a-thon at the end of our training program. So they're all going to be spending a few weeks thinking up of new applications. So definitely some good ideas in there. Yeah, I'm just like super excited about what this is all going to unlock around the writing experience, right? I think it's just going to create a whole new type of experiences and personalize depending on your mood and depending on who else is in the vehicle and how the car can be optimized for all of that.
Absolutely. I think, I'm hitting like 14 or 15 weeks now in this like shelter in place in California. And it's fascinating because I've actually gained a lot of time because I'm not driving. Right. I think I lost like 2 to 4 hours a day driving.
Wow.
And so like, yeah. And it kind of goes to show that if we can like bring back some of that like productivity element into life, like you can really enhance again how we can contribute to society. Or it doesn't even have to be productivity, but it's even that ritual of just breaking up the day. Some of my colleagues and I, feel like days are almost becoming longer because where I'm sitting right now is also like where I relax. Right. Like it's not just like work mode, it's also play mode and it's everything mode. So building in that ritual of trying to break apart your routine, having the car as like the instrument through which we engage in that ritual, I think there's a lot of potential there to make us more mindful and more efficient.
Absolutely. Jamila El-Shubari had an interesting thought there too, which kind of piggybacks on our conversation. Sean, have you thought of using your experience in the healthcare industry, such as clinical decision making? I mean, I'm gonna like paraphrase this question a little bit. Again, it's this intersection of the healthcare space and the automotive space, and this idea of maybe as you enter a car, can we make sure you leave the car in a better state than when you entered it? And I know you're a big meditator, right? You meditate a lot.
Yes.
How do you think we can bring that into the vehicle experience?
Yeah, so I definitely don't want to recommend people meditating while driving yet, but the truth is there's actually,
if you're a passenger.
Yeah, if you're a passenger, for sure. So this book I have in the back, it talks about the secret spiritual art of succeeding at work. And one of the elements there, right, is getting very clear on what is your unique soul print, particularly what is soul print, right? Well, that's your foundational values. Like what makes Rana uniquely her? What I find to be a possible interesting experiment or approach that one could do is building cues of mindfulness while you are driving, right? So I'm not telling people to close their eyes and just focus on their breath. That's probably not safe at this time. But it could be interesting to sort of like, let's say at a stoplight, maybe you could use that as like a brief pause to just look inward and look in yourself. Or maybe there are different types of meditation. I don't know if anyone here has heard of walking meditations, where the goal is actually to be fully absorbed. The goal is to be fully absorbed in your scene. It is a form of meditation to get absorbed in your work. In that sense, you enter the state, I think Patanjali in his book Yogic Sutras, which is right in between your book and Buddha and the Dadas, right here, it's called a state of samadhi or full engagement, and you feel oneness. It's when time flows away and you're like working on your doctoral thesis and it just like flew by. The goal, and the goal is that it is possible to actually drive safely and be in this fully, because only you're being. One of my old mentors at B&B used to formerly work in Formula One, or he was a Formula One racer, and it's fascinating. So he actually said that with a lot of people who are in the race car space, they have to be 100% on. Right, because they have to be fully aware of like every minute detail. Like a millisecond shift is life or death or an accident, or being out of the game for 3 months. So that urgency, that intensity of focus, I believe can be trained in everybody. I don't think that's just one individual. And if you could train the ability to immensely focus on your scheme, not only do you make people safer drivers, they actually become ultimately more mindful. So
yeah, like really interesting. Very, very interesting. And Dr. Rakesh, I like your comment on the use of emotion AI with nudging behavior, right? Like use these kinds of technologies to motivate mindfulness or motivate or persuade, healthier behavior. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I'll take one more question from Yep.
I want to jump in, and I agree with you, Anna, about this comment here. Responsibility requires being awake, consciously processing information. So if we were gonna basically introduce something about mindfulness, it would for sure need to focus on almost enhancing our ability to consciously process info.
Yeah.
Although like also controlling it to avoid cognitive overload, which was what I talked about at your at the Emotion Summit in 2019.
Yeah, exactly. Balance. You don't want to be understimulated or obviously cognitively overloaded. All right, so I'll take one more question. I think that's really important from Nisreen. Hey, Sean and Rana, please speak to the ethics component of machine learning as it pertains to collecting and retaining data, especially in light of recurring data breaches. Very, very important topic. It's key for us at Affectiva. Data privacy and especially actually opt-in and consent. We believe that we do not engage in business where people are not explicitly consenting to sharing this information. In the automotive context, in addition, none of the data leaves the car, right? It's processed on the fly, in the vehicle, on the edge. So, your video, if you like, never leaves the vehicle. It never gets stored anywhere. It's a big topic for us. I'm curious how you look at it, Sean.
Well, BMW is inherently a German company, and so we follow like the strictest standards to be GDPR compliant. That's pretty much all I can say on that topic. We're doing our best.
It's definitely top of mind for us. And again, it's an opportunity where, we as thought leaders are advocating for the right way to do this, especially in the context of a vehicle where there's going to be multiple sensors that know a lot of information about you. So it's definitely big topic.
Like speaking just more about the technology for it, right? Like the idea is that, as Rana had said, the data can never leave the car. And it's remaining on edge is that's the term that we use. So then the question becomes like, once that data is collected, do you basically build a customized ML model that only stays in that car? Or do we create a sort of federated learning approach, which requires synchronization to some cloud structure? For those of you on the call, on the more technical slant, it's called Federated Learning. Google has a great article on this. But if you are going to eventually push that data to the cloud, that also requires a conscious consent. And I think one of the shortcomings of just any company learning to adapt to GDPR compliance is being transparent about that. Sometimes when I go on like news websites, I'll just click a button for cookie access, and I might not have realized that by clicking for cookie access, I also gave them the ability to now market my data and learn about my clicking behavior. And so that transparency element is super important as we move forward.
100%, absolutely. Yeah. All right, so I am going to announce our winners, and then I'll ask you a final question. So our book winners for today, drum roll, is Yahya Abdelaziz and Ahmed Mohammed Ahmed Atiya. Congratulations on winning Girl Decoded. If you get the book and read it, please come back and share what resonated the most with you. All right, so Sean, you talked about how you kind of sent out vibes into the universe and ended up in your job at BMW doing innovation around human vehicle interfaces and kind of reimagining the future of transportation. What's your advice for young people who are tuned in and are looking to get either into the automotive space or the machine learning space? What would be your top piece of advice?
Okay. Yeah, if you're so if you're interested in getting into the automotive space, my advice to you would be like explore what are particular problems that you want to solve. You'll likely find alignment. I mean, there are at least like 10, if not 20 very large automobile companies out there, and then dozens more startups. If you can identify a specific problem, all automotive companies are always looking for people to help. The issue of why maybe your application disappears is because it's just vague. Like you say, you want to work on automotive, but what does that even mean, right? Like, what's the mission that you want to be working on? I think mission alignment is really key. And this almost ties to the second part about like getting into machine learning. Although I will say for machine learning, the easiest path, if you have time on your side, I would strongly suggest one study like math or some form of STEM in high school or in college or in grad school, because that will give you the foundation. If you don't have the time or the flexibility to go to school to learn that, however, on where you can learn at your own pace. But all this is really tied, I think, to all of this, and I mentioned this a bit earlier in the call, is identifying your unique soul print. And so that's like, what are like Rana el Kaliouby's like founding values? Like, what are my, as Sean Batir, like founding values? Like for me, I mean, just to get a little bit personal, right? For me, like one of my really key goals is to always be evolving. And so if I can sense that I can't evolve in a position or a place or a context, then I need to move into a place or a location where I can continue evolving. Because when you figure out what your unique soul print is, and it's usually a mixture of 4 to 5 very core central values that you defined very early in your life or during a traumatic experience. If you can figure out what your soul print is, then that becomes your guiding light, and it helps you like really clarify, how you want to make an impact on the field of AI or in automotive. So, yeah.
I love this. Soul print, identify your soul print, identify your core values, and then align your mission. Love it.
Yes.
Great advice, Sean. It was awesome having you today here. And hope to continue collaborating and working together. Thank you.
Definitely, yeah. And I'm excited that we finally get to talk about meditation, Rana.
I know. You know what? It's my 2020 resolution. It's been my annual resolution for like several years now, but I've signed up to use Headspace.
Nice. Okay.
And there's 6 months left in the year.
You should check out Mind Valley too. They're pretty cool.
Yeah, I will do that. I will do that.
Yeah.
Thank you again. And thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day. Stay well.